Hello, I'm Emma-Louise Coffey and you're welcome to the Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. On this week's episode, Grass 10 advisor John Douglas joins us to explain how to get grazing back on track during the month of March.
Yeah, so grazing obviously was tricky for most people and hasn't probably started for some more people yet this year. So February's seen a lot of rainfall, especially down, I suppose, the south and the southwest, and fairly heavy in the east as well. So I suppose it's really affected the drier farms so far, because they would be expecting to get, maybe 30% or close to it grazed during February as part of their spring rotation plan, and they've been affected, I suppose. So you have farms there, some dry farms that kept fairly well with the targets, even though the rain did fall. Maybe some more farms maybe more in the east that maybe just didn't get quite as much rain as the south, and then you have those farms who maybe didn't get very little grazed in February and have only started grazing since the rain stopped last week, and they might be on maybe 15% graze now. So you have dry farms that some of them are more or less on target now, and there's more than maybe are only halfway to the targets at this stage. And then of course you have the heavier farms, which really, I suppose, grazing in February is a bonus. So a lot of those farms have gone out over the weekend and will get out over the next few days, and they will probably be more or less where they are on other years, I suppose, maybe slightly behind in some cases. So all in all, a lot of farms was behind, and I suppose playing catch up this week in terms of grazing.
Looking then, John, to get some tips and advice from you based on the various scenarios. Like you mentioned, some farms are on target or pretty close to it, particularly in the east of the country. And I guess, for those farms, it's proceed as normal and stick to the targets. But looking then to the other scenarios, let's put ourselves in the shoes of a farmer that has 15% grazed. So they're not quite at their target for, say, the end of February and leading into March. What should they do over the month of March, say between now and the end of the first rotation?
Yeah, so I suppose, as you say there, Emma-Louise, like the goal is to start the second rotation on time and have a nice supply of grass and good quality grass at that time. And really, to do that for farmers who are behind, it is a case of just I suppose focusing on getting as much area grazed as possible over the next week, 10 days, and then I suppose look and see where their farm covers are in terms of will they running the farm cover down to lower that. But for the next week, 10 days, it's really about focusing on getting through area, and they're catching up a bit on targets. Now, in saying that, there's no point in trying to use the same spring rotation planner for farmers that are on target and farmers that are behind target at the moment, because I suppose paddocks that were only grazing the last week will take probably around close to 45 days of a recovery period to have that grass supply back on farm. So really, you're talking probably about pushing the targets of having 30% grazed by the 1st of March out by possibly 10 days, and so maybe 30% of the farm grazed by let's say the 10th of March, and then another 30% grazed by, let's say, the 25th of March, and then finishing up somewhere between the 10th and 15th of April. They're just general dates. It's going to depend on growth rates throughout the month, whether and the regrowth on the first grazed paddocks, which should be good, because there were paddocks that were grazed off during, so I suppose, good-ish weather. So generally they tend to bounce back quick, and so they will have got a good start anyway. So hopefully that continues. But so for the ones behind target, it's really about adjusting your spring rotation planner, moving the dates back by a week to 10 days.
And then, John, you also refer to farms, on a heavier soil type, and I think we have seen in the last few years these farmers have pushed the boundaries, and you talk about February as bonus territory. Like, a lot of these farmers are achieving a certain level of grazing in February, and I suppose using all of the tools of on-off grazing in order to get out. Unfortunately, February this year didn't allow that. Where farmers are starting from a base and maybe those last few days of February where things came dry, that's where they're looking at getting out. What is your recommendation for grazing, and I guess starting, and how do you see the first rotation working for these farmers?
Yeah, so look, the heavy farms, like the heavy farm motto, the heavy soils motto is to, graze what you can when you can. And while we sort of even think that, a lot of heavy farms are back grazing now, some of them aren't yet. I was talking to some yesterday that, it'll be the weekend before they get out, and now they're worried about is there going to be rain coming in. But look, that's another matter. So you really have to be, if you're not out already on heavy soils, you want to be walking your driest paddocks daily this week, and finding it mightn't be a paddock, but it might be a section of a paddock that's dry enough. And I suppose this is where your grazing infrastructure comes into play, that you have access with roadways or spur roadways or cow walks, and multiple access points and back fencing, to allow for maybe some on-off grazing this week to get them back out, because there is I suppose in most cases there is sort of a dry spell at the minute, and it's relatively settled. So that would be worth it, I think, for those farms to do that. Two 3 hour grazings during the day will allow the cows to get about 90% of their forage intake in. So if cows are eating, we'll say equivalent of 10 kilos of forage at the moment, they would be able to get 8 or 9 kilos in through 2 3 hour grazings, and they might need a little bit of silage, 1 or 2 kilos of dry matter silage in the evening time or night time, just to see them through for the day. So that's what they should be doing, and getting through area that way, to start at least, and then hopefully then it'll continue to dry out, and they'll get into more paddocks, and they'll have more options. And really it's about getting through as much area, so you're still targeting lighter covers. And what we mean by lighter covers, I suppose, covers that are, we'll say, somewhere between maybe 700 and 1,000, those type of covers, and that'll really help you get through percentages grazed, and that's what it's all about, to have percentage grazed, and that will equal a good supply of grass then starting the second round. And I suppose, on those heavier farms, it's always important to identify probably 2 or 3 paddocks, and maybe they're the wettest, or maybe they're ones with the worst infrastructure, or for whatever reason, they don't, identify them now, that say, look, I'll leave them to last, and if I get into them, and if I need them, and I get into them, well and good, and if I don't, I'll just leave them on the back burner there, and I might take them out as an early cut of silage bales, maybe in late April or mid-April or something like that, sometime like that. And the reason for that is that the heavy farms mightn't get through the whole 100% of their grazing area in the first rotation. So, and by the time maybe their first paddocks have recovered, they might have 3 paddocks left, and they might decide that they should skip those and move straight into the paddocks that have recovered, because they want to keep the quality, and they want to keep those paddocks right for the summertime.
Looking then, John, to the idea, sometimes when we get into March, conditions are good and people are stretching the grazing to a 24-hour block, 36-hour block. At this point, of this year, what's your recommendation? Is it the 12 hours, or is it your 24 or 36-hour blocks?
I have heard of drier farms going to that. Now, I suppose it depends what covers they're grazing. Like they're trying to get through area maybe and catch up, and the ground conditions are good, and the covers are, I don't know, we'll say between 1,000 and maybe 13 or 1,400 or something, somewhere in that range. It is possible to do that. To go to 24 hours or 36. I have heard people doing that. I suppose, like in the first rotation, really we have a great opportunity now with the ground conditions so dry to try and graze out paddocks well and get meat residuals. That'll have a big knock-on effect. If we leave 200 or 300 kilos of dry matter behind us on paddocks, for the summertime. So now is a great opportunity while the weather's trying to get them grazed off. And if you can do that, we go in 24 hours, well then, there's no real issue. But I suppose the issue comes into it if you're not getting good graze outs, then you should be allocating better and probably moving to 12 hours. And also on drier farms that maybe have over 20% graze now, or hitting close to 30% graze, they're probably looking at getting into some heavy covers while the weather is still good. So they might have some covers there that are, we'll say, over 1,400 that they're going to get grazed out. And to get a good graze out on those covers, probably 12-hour wires is still necessary to get good clean outs on them.
And looking then at a national level, John, from Pasture Base Ireland figures, can you give us an indication of average farm cover, so I suppose the level of grass cover on farms across the country, and also looking at the current diet that you see farmers are feeding animals in terms of the breakdown of grass, concentrate and silage?
Yeah, so I suppose the huge opportunity is there's a high level of grass on farms at the minute. So from Pasture Base, the data ran yesterday. It was 925 kilos of dry matter per hectare. So that's nearly 1 ton of dry matter on every hectare that's recorded on Pasture Base, which is an awful lot of grass to get through. So that's a huge opportunity to get cows out to grass, to reduce silage and reduce meal in the diet. So I'm talking about, I suppose, when I'm saying reduce the meal back to 3 or 4 kilos of meal. So there's, and we're taking silage out of the diet altogether. So we can see from the Pasture Base there's an average of 2.5 kilos going in to cows at the moment still in their diet. So while there's probably some farms with 0 going in, there's probably some farms with 5 or 6 kilos of silage going in at the moment still. So those farms will really have to question, should I be grazing more? Should I be reducing that silage and grazing more and getting through more area? And then, once the area's got through and maybe, the handbrake needs to be put on towards the later in March, then maybe it's a better opportunity to go and feed the silage. So we're trying to get, area graze and set up for the second round at the moment to have a good grass supply in April. And, putting silage into diet is only slowing things down just at the moment. We don't know what way the weather will be, maybe in late March. If we got another wet spell, that would be the opportunity then to put the silage in. So we have a lot of grass on the farm, and I suppose if we do a quick sum there, for farms that have started grazing last week and they should be on maybe a 45-day rotation, so finishing up around the 10th to the 15th of April, the growth rate over that period probably won't be too far away from 20 a day. It might be slightly high on some farms, especially heavier farms. It won't be quite as high, but those farms aren't going to get out maybe as much. And they generally have higher farm covers because they didn't get to graze out for as long as they'd like in the back end of last year too, because the weather got wet. So we take the figure of 925, and we say it grows 20 a day between now and the end of the first rotation, and we say the farm is stocked at 2.5, and over that period, over the next 40 days. We say the demand is about 30. So I'm just taking that, on average over the next month, cows might be eating 14 kilos of grass and we'd say 3 or 4 kilos of meal over the period. So if we're stocked at 2.5 and each cow is eating 14 kilos, each cow is eating about 12 kilos of grass, that's a demand of about 30. Okay. So if we do 2.5 times 12, that's 30 kilos of dry matter per hectare. We're taking the growth to be 20. So we're in a deficit every day of about 10 a day for the next 40 days. So if we take that figure of 925 and we take 400 off it, so we have a deficit of 10 a day for 40 days at a deficit of 400, for over the next 40 days. So 925 minus 400 brings you back to an average farm cover of 525, which is about where you want to end up for the end of the first rotation. So basically, just looking across the country on a national scale, Emma-Louise, you're looking at, probably minimal silage in the diet, very little, and that will see us through till the end of the first rotation.
That's a really interesting calculation you have there, John, and I think it'll give us confidence, going forward that, to really focus on getting as much area grazed as possible that you talk about in the next week to 10 days. And, you're not going to run out of grass necessarily by doing that. And as you say, like, I guess when you're doing a grass walk, on a weekly basis, you can monitor where farm cover is going. And the way you've stepped it out, where we're giving cows an allowance of 12 kilos per day, that's 30 kilos of a demand, in terms of the overall picture on the farm. you're hitting a magic number there in terms of at 525 you're not going below the 500 mark in terms of, you know, that I suppose golden number we don't want to fall underneath. In terms then of grass growth, you know, you're predicting grass is going to grow on average 20 kilos, and that's, I suppose, a predicted growth. I suppose one factor for grass production is you know, grazing off the paddock in the first round, and then the second factor would be fertilizer. A lot of farmers were slow to get out with fertilizer with the poor weather conditions in the month of February. Can you give us some recommendations as to what we should be looking at for the month of March?
There's different situations, I suppose, on this scenario as well, Emma-Louise. So I know a lot of farms probably got some slurry out, you know, after the opening opening of the closed period, so they got some slurry out. So I suppose those paddocks that got slurry and on the drier, you know, well drained farms, they should be aiming to get around 70 units out in total by early April. So if they've got, we'll say, 20 units out from slurry, which I'm talking about 2,500 gallons, we say, of the low emission slurry spreading would supply about 20 units. So, you know, that means we've maybe about 50 units left to get out on that. So probably over the last week, a lot of farms would have put out, you know, maybe another 30 units or another half bag of urea on top of that. So, you know, that'll bring them up to their about 40, 45 units, and then they'll top up with another maybe half bag towards later on in March to bring them through to April. So that'll be their 70 units out. Then there's probably areas even within those farms, or some farms didn't get any slurry out early or fertilizer out early, and you know, I suppose if those farms had possibly, you know, 60 units out by early April would be okay. You know, so no point catching up with fertilizer. We have to, you know, adjust as well, and you know, if we've missed going to growth in February with fertilizer, we just reduce it a little bit. So, you know, on well dried soils, bringing that back from 70 just back to 60 units. So, you know, that's probably two applications of maybe, you know, 30 each, something in that range, or, you know, 35 now and half a bag later on in the month, whichever it is to make up the nitrogen target on the farm. And then on heavier farms, again, you know, most heavier farms or heavy soil farms wouldn't get much fertilizer or slurry out during February time, so they're looking at probably going this week. And on those heavier farms, you're probably talking about having about 45 units out by early April. So, you know, that could be half a bag of urea now and half a bag later on in the month, or it might be your 2,500 gallons of slurry now on some of the farm. You know, maybe the paddocks that have been grazed in the last week and some of the lower covers. So if we do 2,500 gallons of low emission slurry spreading on those paddocks, again, we're getting 20 units on them, and maybe topping up with another half a bag towards later on in the month. And then we might do it the opposite way around as well. We might put some urea, half a bag on some of the heavy farm today, and we might go with some slurry later on in the month. If, you know, maybe say that some of the ground is being closed up for silage or whatever, that could get slurry. So we're getting slurry out, and we're reducing the need for chemical fertilizer. So it's using the low emission slurry spreading and spreading it in the springtime. We're getting the most benefit out of slurry, and that's reducing back to chemical fertilizer as well. So, you know, there are wins there because it's, you know, it's better for the environment and better for the farmer in that regard.
And I think, John, you've given us a great picture of how things are currently, and, you know, I think the phrase that you used from the perspective of a heavier farm is relevant to everybody in this year. You know, after a really tough February in terms of grazing conditions, people should really exploit the good weather that we have now and graze what we can when we can. And, you know, your idea of going into those light covers and grazing off, you know, area in order to get it back and ready for the second rotation in early April. You know, the final point then, you know, from the financial perspective, there are huge gains to be made. And as you say, for an 80 cow farm, you know, there's €200 per day if we can get cows out. Thank you, John.
All right, thank you very much, Emma-Louise.
That's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast, and my thanks to John Douglas for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and join me next time for your Dairy Edge.